Another reason why I left the church, religion, Christianity, and fundamentalism is that church denies how race impacts our legal system. So recently, I took a course online about how racism and race impacts the severity of sentencing during crimes and how it impacts the death penalty and prisoners in general. Race significantly impacts the legal system, particularly conserving convictions and the death penalty, with Black defendants facing harsher outcomes compared to their white counterparts. Studies consistently show racial disparities in sentencing, with Black individuals more likely to be sentenced to death, specifically when the victim is white. This disparity is not limited to the death penalty system. Racial bias also affects other stages of the legal process, including arrest, charging, sentencing, and jury selection. So how does it have an impact on conviction and sentencing? Disparities in charging and sentencing. Studies indicate that Black defendants are more likely to be charged with more serious offenses and receive harsher sentencing, even when controlling for factors like severity of the crime and the criminal's history. Racial bias in jury selections and jury decisions. Juries with fewer people of color are more likely to convict Black defendants, with studies showing that all white jurors are more likely to impose death sentencing, according to the Sentencing Project. You can look that up online. Victims' race influence. The race of the victim significantly affects sentencing outcomes, with defendants convicted of killing white individuals more likely to receive the death penalty, according to the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Death penalty disparities. Disproportionate impact on Black defendants. Black individuals are disproportionately represented on death row, with studies showing they are more likely to be sentenced to death than white defendants, especially in cases where they supposedly killed a white victim. The death penalty, the federal death penalty. The federal death penalty system also exhibits racial disparities, with Black defendants facing a higher risk of being selected for capital prosecutions, according to a report by a Death Penalty Information Center. What about historical context? The death penalty's application has deep historical roots in racial discrimination, particularly against Black individuals, with examples like the disproportionate executions for rape and other homicide offenses. What about ongoing concerns? Systematic biases. These permeate various stages of the legal process, from policing to sentencing, contributing to disparities in outcomes. Lack of effective remedies. Despite evidence of racial bias, efforts to address these disparities in the legal system have faced challenges, and systematic reforms may be needed to ensure fairness and equal justice. Organizations like NAACP and the ACLU are advocating for systematic changes to address racial bias in the legal system by promoting racial justice. So, racial bias against defenders of color and in favor of white victims have a strong effect on those who are capitally prosecuted, sentenced to death, and executed. A defendant's likelihood of receiving the death penalty correlates with the victim's race. Of the people currently on death row in the U.S., 82% were convicted in cases involving white victims. You look at, let's say you Google famous murdered victims. Most of the very famous victims of violence or crime are white, like the Black Dahlia. Would she have been remembered for what she is now if she had been Hispanic, Black, Asian? I don't think so. You look at missing children. Most of the children on milk cartons were white. I mean, you have about a 30% higher chance of being returned alive because of more news coverage if the victim is white. The term missing white woman syndrome, because media loves to focus when things go badly for white people. There is not as much media attention for anybody that isn't white. If you're African American, Latino, or Hispanic, you have a 3 times more likely chance of going to prison than white people. You have 3 times the chance of being convicted unjustly, like a miscarriage of justice, because you are a minority. So how does the church help, hinder, or progress racism? Well, like all good moral people, Christians, specifically fundamentalist, conservative, white nationalist, MAGA people, all those groups love to legislate and lobby for reforms or stricter laws concerning convictions, paroles, death penalty. If you just Google which states or which political states have the death penalty, a good breakdown would be many Republican states, but not all, are death penalty Republican stance leaning. The Death Penalty Information Center notes that states allowing the death penalty are primarily in Republican leaning regions. Republican voters show higher support. A Gallup poll in October 2023 indicates that 81% of Republicans supported the death penalty, compared to only 32% of Democrats. So 4 out of 5 Republicans believe in the death penalty, while only 1 out of 3 Democrats. However, there are nuances that exist within all parties. Even within the Republican Party, some conservative advocates for the abolition of the death penalty, arguing it is costly, error-prone, and potentially inconsistent with conservative principles. While a majority of Democrats oppose the death penalty, some Democrats may support death penalty in certain situations. So some important considerations are individual views matter. It's crucial to remember that individuals hold dispersed perspectives on the death penalty. Evolving political change. Political landscapes regarding the death penalty can change over time. For example, some Republican-led states are currently debating legislation to abolish the death penalty, according to State Line. Federal versus state. Capital punishment is a legal penalty in some states and at a federal level. Federal actions regarding the death penalty, such as a recent policy change and moratoriums, can impact the national context, according to Wikipedia. In summary, a strong correlation exists between states with the death penalty and conservative Republican political leanings, but this is not an absolute rule, and there are complexities and evolving perspectives within each party on the issue. Even in the most reddest states like Florida and Texas, some of the major large cities like Miami, Orlando, Tampa, Austin, Houston can be very blue Democratic areas. Even within the most extreme forms of MAGA and conservatism, you could see little oases of blue. Now you might be saying, do I believe in the death penalty? I believed in the death penalty for 30 years, based on my very fundamentalist upbringing. Due to the racism, sexism, corporate and prison ineffectualism, I no longer support the death penalty. I know that 7% of executed people are being executed while innocent of the crime they're being executed for. That does not mean they're innocent of every crime. They could very much be guilty of a similar crime in another case. But approximately 7% of executed people should not be executed for the crime they're being executed for. I don't believe a country or a state has the right to execute anyone. And people say, well, they committed murder. So we're going to take someone who committed murder and then murder them. How is that morally superior? You can't condemn murder while voting to kill another person. This is ridiculous. It costs less to keep someone alive for 40 years in prison without possibility of parole than it is to inject them with something